The moment I signed the final divorce papers, I did not cry, nor did I beg. I simply unlocked my phone and pressed one single button that would turn my ex-husband's $350,000 wedding into a crime scene. While he was busy toasting to his new life and his new pregnant mistress, he had no idea that the credit card in his pocket had just turned into a worthless piece of plastic, and the penthouse he thought he won was about to become his prison cell. But before the police arrived at the altar, I had to sit through the most humiliating meeting of my life. My name is Sophia, and at 32 years old, I am the CFO of a private equity firm managing millions. But apparently, I was not enough to manage my own husband ego. Before I tell you how I destroyed his financial life with one sentence, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to smile while someone tried to destroy you, because trust me, the payoff is worth the wait. Conference room at the law firm was freezing cold, a tactical choice I assumed to make people uncomfortable enough to settle quickly. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson, tapped his expensive watch for the third time. It had been 45 minutes. Derek was late. Not just fashionable late, but disrespectful late. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the mahogany table staring at the skyline of Chicago. The silence was broken only by the sound of the heavy glass door swinging open. And there he was. Derek. He did not look like a man going through a divorce. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. He was wearing a suit that I knew cost $4,000 because I was the one who paid the bill 3 months ago. Clinging to his arm was Tiffany. She was young, perhaps 24, and she was wearing a tight white dress that was clearly designed to show off the small bump in her stomach. A baby. The ultimate weapon. But what made my stomach turn was not the baby. It was the woman walking behind them. Jessica, my sister-in-law. Jessica was the wife of Derek's older brother, a woman who had smiled in my face at Thanksgiving dinners for 5 years, while secretly despising everything I represented. She walked in and threw her designer bag onto the table with a thud. She looked at me with that familiar, pitying smile, the kind that is actually a smirk in disguise. "Well, Sophia," she began, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You look tired, but I suppose that is the price of ambition, isn't not it? You should feel lucky, really. Derek has been so patient with your coldness for 5 years. Successful Black women often forget how to be wives. We just want to help you move on so you can get back to your spreadsheets and your lonely nights." I felt Mr. Henderson stiffen beside me, ready to defend me, but I placed a hand on his arm to stop him. I did not need defense, I needed them to sign. Derek pulled out a chair for Tiffany, making a big show of it, treating her like fragile glass. "Let's make this quick," Derek said, not even looking me in the eye. "I have a tasting menu to approve for the wedding reception." You know how it is, Sophia. Or maybe you don't, since our wedding was so budget-friendly compared to what I am planning for Tiffany. Our wedding had cost $50,000 and I had paid for every cent of it while he was still trying to launch his failed sneaker business. But I said nothing. I just pushed the papers across the table. Derek picked up the document and scanned it carelessly. "I want the G-Wagon," he announced suddenly, "and the penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. I am keeping that too. I need a stable home for my new family. And honestly, Sophia, you are never there anyway. You practically live in this office." Mr. Henderson slammed his hand on the table. "That is preposterous. The penthouse is listed as a primary asset of the—" I cut my lawyer off with a sharp look. "Give it to him," I said softly. My voice was calm, steady, deadly. Derek let out a loud laugh, looking at Jessica. "See, I told you she would fold. She knows she owes me. I supported her emotional stability while she was climbing the corporate ladder. I deserve half her empire." Jessica nodded, crossing her arms. "You are doing the right thing, Sophia. Don't be bitter. A man needs a woman who prioritizes him, not someone who prioritizes her bank account. Tiffany, here is going to be a wonderful mother, unlike some people who are too selfish to even consider it." That was the low blow, the microaggression that was meant to shatter me. They knew we had tried for 2 years. They knew the miscarriages, but they used it as a weapon to justify his betrayal. I looked at Tiffany, who was busy checking her reflection in her phone screen, oblivious to the fact that she was just the next victim in line. "Fine," I said. I picked up my pen. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper seemed to echo in the room. One signature, two signatures. I was signing away. The car I bought, the furniture I picked out, the life I built. Or so they thought. Derek grabbed the papers the moment I finished signing. He smirked, holding them up like a trophy. "Finally free," he said, kissing Tiffany on the cheek. "Come on, babe, let's go, spend some money. We have a wedding to pay for." "And Sophia, thanks for being reasonable for once. Try to find some happiness. Okay? Maybe get a cat." They walked out the door, a parade of arrogance and delusion. Jessica paused at the doorway, looking back at me one last time. "You know, Sophia, I really hope you learn from this. Men want softness, not a CEO in the bedroom. Goodbye." The door clicked shut. The room fell silent again. Mr. Henderson looked at me, clearly frustrated. "Sophia, I cannot believe you let him take the penthouse. That property has equity worth $2 million. Why did you simply roll over?" I stood up slowly, smoothing out my skirt for the first time that morning, allowing a genuine smile to touch my lips. "I did not roll over, Mr. Henderson. I just let him dig his own grave." I pulled out my phone and dialed the private number for my banking liaison. It rang once before a voice answered. "Ms. Carter, how can we help you today?" I walked to the window, looking down at the street where I could see Derek helping Tiffany into the G-Wagon. My G-Wagon. Execute protocol. "Omega," I said, my voice cold as ice. There was a brief pause on the other line. "Are you sure, Ms. Carter? This will trigger an immediate fraud alert and freeze all assets associated with the secondary cardholders. It will also initiate the repossession clause for any collateral purchased with company funds." I watched as Derek drove away laughing, unaware that he was driving a stolen car towards a wedding he could no longer afford. "I am sure," I replied. "Cancel every single card linked to my account. Flag all recent transactions as unauthorized, and send the repo team to the Rosewood estate. The reception starts at 6 p.m. Do not be late." I hung up the phone. Mr. Henderson was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. "You knew," he asked. "You knew the penthouse was not in your name." "It is held in a blind trust," I whispered. "The deed explicitly states that tenancy is revoked immediately upon the dissolution of marriage." Derek just signed a document, acknowledging he has no legal claim to my trust assets in exchange for a car he cannot make payments on. By the time he cuts the cake, he will be homeless and bankrupt. I picked up my bag and walked towards the door, leaving the silence of the room behind me. The signing was over. Now the real show was about to begin. Derek wasted absolutely no time in celebrating his perceived victory, because less than 2 hours after leaving the law firm, my phone buzzed with a notification that made me laugh out loud in my quiet office. He was at Tiffany & Co. on Michigan Avenue. Of course he was. He had always promised me a heavy platinum upgrade to my simple gold wedding band for our 10th anniversary, but he never quite found the funds. Yet here he was, barely divorced for an hour, ready to drop a fortune on a mistress who had been in his life for less than 6 months. I could picture it perfectly. The sales associate offering them sparkling water, the velvet trays sliding across the glass counter, and Tiffany pointing at the biggest rock she could find regardless of the quality. I pulled up the security feed on my laptop. Not from the store, obviously, but from the tracking on his phone, which was still linked to my family cloud account. He had forgotten to turn off location, sharing another reckless mistake of an amateur narcissist. He was moving quickly, almost manic. I opened my banking app and watched the transaction attempt, come through in real time. $45,000 for a 3-carat cushion, cut diamond. He was not just buying a ring. He was buying an image, trying to prove to the world and to himself that he was the wealthy mogul he pretended to be. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the decline. It was not a hard decline yet, just a soft block. I had placed on his primary personal card, flagging it for suspicious activity. I imagined the scene clearly. The sales associate smiling politely, then frowning as the terminal buzzed. The awkward silence, the heat rising up the back of Derek's neck. He would laugh it off, of course. He would blame the bank. He would say something loudly about fraud protection, being too sensitive when you travel internationally, even though he was 10 minutes from our old apartment. And then he did exactly what I knew he would do. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the Business Platinum card. This was the card linked to Brooks Consulting, the shell company he had started, and the one I had heavily invested in as a silent partner. He thought this was his safety net. He thought using company funds for a personal expense was a clever loophole to bypass the freeze on his personal accounts. He handed it over. Confident, arrogant, stupid. I let my finger hover over the freeze button for a second. If I blocked this transaction now, he would leave the store empty-handed and embarrassed. But that was too small a punishment. I wanted him to commit a crime. I wanted him to create a paper trail of embezzlement. So I let it go through. The notification popped up. Transaction approved, $45,000 charged to a business account for personal jewelry. He had just pierced the corporate veil, giving me every legal weapon I need to dismantle his business. Later, I sat back in my chair, sipping my lukewarm coffee, feeling a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. But my peace did not last long. My phone rang again, and the caller ID flashed a name that used to send me into a panic of people-pleasing Mama Joyce. I debated ignoring it, but I knew she would just keep calling until she filled my voicemail with venom. So I answered, keeping my voice neutral. "Hello, Joyce," I said, skipping the title of Mom, because she lost that privilege the moment she helped her son pack his bags to move in with his mistress. "Oh, Sophia, I am glad you picked up, Mama." Joyce's voice was high-pitched, dripping with that fake southern sweetness that barely concealed the poison underneath. "I was just calling to see if you could drop off those old winter coats of Derek, the ones in the cedar closet. We are clearing out space in the new house for the baby nursery, and we need to donate the old junk." The new house, she meant the penthouse, the one she thought belonged to her son, the one I was currently in the process of reclaiming. She was already measuring curtains for a home she would never live in. "We'll have the movers pack everything and send it to storage," I replied calmly. "You can pick it up there, storage." Her voice sharpened, cutting through the act. "Well, aren't you just being difficult as always? You know Tiffany is so excited about decorating. She has such a fresh eye, so modern, not like your style, which was always so cold and sterile, kind of like you, honestly." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. I knew she was baiting me. I knew she wanted a reaction. "We are just so happy for Derek," she continued, not waiting for a response. "Finally, he has a woman who knows her place. A woman who understands that a man needs to lead. And honestly, Sophia, it is a blessing in disguise for you. You can focus on your little career, and Derek can focus on building a legacy. You know how much this family values bloodlines? Tiffany is barely showing, but she is already glowing. She is going to give the Brooks family a real heir. Something your dried-up womb could never do." The air left my lungs. It was a direct hit. She knew about the IVF treatments. She knew about the nights I spent crying on the bathroom floor while Derek played video games in the next room, ignoring my grief. She knew that my infertility was the deepest wound I carried, and she had just poured acid right into it. I did not scream, I did not cry, I did not defend myself. I simply breathed in and out slowly, remembering that anger is a loss of control, and I was in full control. "Is that all, Joyce?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. She laughed, a harsh cackle. Oh, don't be sensitive. We just want what is best for Derek. And a barren wife was never going to work out anyway. Enjoy your empty life, Sophia. We will be busy celebrating real family love. The line went dead. She hung up, feeling triumphant, feeling like she had won, but she had made a fatal error. She had assumed that because I was quiet, I was weak. She forgot who paid for the roof over her head and the wheels under her feet. I placed the phone down on my desk, my hand trembling slightly, not from sadness, but from adrenaline. I opened my text messages and found the number for my personal assistant, Marcus. Marcus, I typed, execute the repo order on the Range Rover immediately. The one registered to Mrs. Joyce Brooks' location is likely the exquisite nail salon on 4th Street she usually goes to on Tuesdays. And Marcus? Yes, Sophia. His reply came instantly. Make sure they tow it while she is still inside the appointment. I want her to walk home. I locked my phone and stood up, walking to the window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the streets below. Mama Joyce loved that white Range Rover. It was her status symbol, the way she proved to her church friends that her son was a success. She did not know that the lease was in my name, paid for by my bonuses. If she wanted to talk about legacy and bloodlines, she could do it from the back of an Uber, or better yet, she could walk. The exercise would be good for her heart, assuming she actually had one. The game had changed. They wanted to attack my womanhood, my pain, my body. So I was going to attack the only thing they truly loved, their unearned lifestyle. The ring was a trap, the car was a lesson. And I was just getting started because the wedding was still days away and I had plenty more cards to cancel. The drive to the house I had purchased 3 years ago felt like a funeral procession for a life I had already buried. I parked my rental car 2 houses down, not wanting to alert anyone that I had arrived. My plan was simple. I needed to retrieve my personal archives, specifically the hard drives containing my grandmother's recipes and my collection of vintage handbags that I viewed as investments rather than accessories. The divorce decree stated clearly that I had 24 hours to retrieve personal effects before Derek took possession of the property. A concession I had made only because I knew he would be evicted by the bank within 90 days anyway. I unlocked the front. I unlocked door quietly, expecting the house to be empty. Derek was supposed to be at a tasting for the wedding menu, and Mama Joyce was presumably walking home from the nail salon after her car was towed. The house was silent, but the air felt heavy, violated. I walked through the foyer, ignoring the ghost of the wedding portrait that still hung above the mantelpiece. Derek looked so charming in that photo, a perfect mask for the monster underneath. As I reached the top of the stairs, I heard a sound coming from the master bedroom. It was the distinct sound of zippers being pulled and leather being thrown. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline rush through my veins. I pushed the door open and froze. Jessica, my sister-in-law, was standing inside my walk-in closet. She had dragged my stepladder into the center of the room and was systematically pulling down my Hermes collection. The orange boxes were scattered on the floor, some crushed under her heels. She was stuffing my Birkin, 35 in gold Togo leather, into a cheap garbage bag as if it were dirty laundry. I cleared my throat and the sound made her jump. She spun around, clutching the bag against her chest like a shield. When she saw it was me, her expression shifted instantly from shock to that familiar sneer of entitlement. "Oh," she said, letting out a breath of annoyance. "You scared me, Sophia. I thought you were the cleaning lady I tried to hire. I told Derek this place is a pigsty." I looked at the pile of bags on the floor. There was my Kelly and Rose Pourpre, my constant companion during my first year as CFO. There was the limited edition clutch I bought in Paris. Seeing them treated like trash made my blood boil. "Put them down, Jessica," I said, my voice low and steady. "Those are not yours." Jessica laughed, a sharp barking sound that grated on my nerves. She turned back to the shelf, reaching for a vintage Chanel flat bag. "Actually, Derek sent me here," he said. "You left these behind," he said, Since you are moving into a smaller, sadder life, you would not have any use for high fashion anymore. She tossed the Chanel into the garbage bag with a sickening thud. Besides, she continued, not even looking at me. Tiffany needs these. She has a lot of social events coming up now that she is marrying into the Brooks family. She needs to look the part of a successful wife, something you never quite managed to pull off, Derek said. You should consider this a gift, a way to apologize for wasting the best years of his youth with your coldness. The audacity of the statement almost made me laugh. Derek was 35 and had never held a job for longer than 6 months. I had funded his lifestyle, his failed businesses, and his ego for 5 years. And now I was supposed to apologize for it by donating $50,000 worth of handbags to his mistress. I took a step forward, but I stopped myself. I remembered the advice of my lawyer. Do not engage physically. Do not give them a reason to file a restraining order. I took a deep breath and pulled my phone out of my pocket. Jessica, I am going to ask you one time to leave my house and leave my property alone, I said, lifting the phone so she could see the screen. She rolled her eyes, shoving another bag into the sack. Oh, stop being dramatic, Sophia. You are not going to do anything. You are too worried about your precious reputation. You would not want the neighbors to hear a successful black woman fighting with her family. Would you? It is so stereotypical. She was banking on my pride. She thought I would swallow the disrespect just to keep up appearances. She was wrong. I unlocked my phone and dialed 3 numbers. 911. I put it on speaker. Jessica paused, a black clutch dangling from her hand. Who are you calling? Dispatch 911. What is your emergency? The operator voice filled the quiet room. Jessica's eyes went wide. She dropped the clutch. I am at 4502 Willow Creek Drive, I said, clearly, keeping my eyes locked on Jessica. There is an intruder in my home. She has broken in and is currently stuffing tens of thousands of dollars of merchandise into garbage bags. I fear for my safety. Jessica's jaw dropped. You are crazy, she hissed, rushing toward me. Hang up the phone, Sophia. We are family. You cannot call the police on family. I stepped back, avoiding her grasping hands. She is becoming aggressive, I told the operator. She is refusing to leave. Officers are on their way. Ma'am, stay on the line. I walked out of the bedroom and down the stairs, creating distance. Jessica followed me, screaming now, her face turning a blotchy red. You are a witch, Sophia, she yelled, throwing the garbage bag down the stairs, looking at the expensive leather spilling out onto the hardwood floor. Derek is going to kill you. He told me I could take them. He said they were community property. I stood by the front door, my hand on the doorknob, waiting. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder by the second. You know, Jessica, I said calmly, watching her panic. The house is still in my name. The divorce decree gives Derek possession starting tomorrow. Today, this is still my home, and you are just a trespasser, stealing assets listed in a federal trust. The blue and red lights flashed against the living room window, illuminating the fear in her eyes. She realized too late that she was not fighting a scorned wife. She was fighting a corporate executive who knew how to leverage the law. 2 police officers walked up the driveway. I opened the door before they could knock. That is her. I pointed at Jessica, who was standing at the bottom of the stairs, trying to compose herself. Officer, please. Jessica started, her voice trembling, putting on her best damsel in distress act. My sister-in-law is having a mental breakdown. I was just helping her pack. I handed the officer my driver license and the deed to the house, which I had prepared on my phone. This woman is not a resident, I said coldly. I have never given her a key. She broke in through the back sliding door. I want to press charges for breaking and entering and attempted grand larceny. The value of the items in that bag exceeds $50,000, making it a felony. The officer looked at the spilled bags, then at Jessica, who was sweating profusely. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back. No, You cannot arrest me, Jessica shrieked as the officer grabbed her wrist. Call Derek. Call my husband. I watched as they clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists. The cold metallic sound was more satisfying than any apology she could have offered. She was dragged out the front door, kicking and screaming about how unfair this was, about how I was a vindictive monster. The neighbors were watching from their porches, phones out recording the entire spectacle. Jessica, who prided herself on being the respectable suburban mom, was now the star of the neighborhood crime watch group. As the patrol car pulled away with Jessica in the back seat, my phone rang. It was Derek, I answered, putting the phone to my ear. Sophia, what the hell is going on? Derek screamed, his voice cracking with rage. Jessica just called me from the back of a cop car. She said you had her arrested. Are you out of your mind? She is family. She was just getting some things for Tiffany. I looked around my quiet, empty house. The bags were safe. The silence was back. But this time, it was the silence of victory. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain myself. I simply channeled every ounce of indifference I had left. She was stealing Derek, I said calmly. And since you are so fond of legal documents, you should know that, until tomorrow, anything inside this house is mine. You drop those charges right now, or I swear to God, Sophia, I will ruin you. I will tell everyone about. I cut him off, bored by his threats. Tell your brother to hire a good lawyer, I said, because Jessica is going to need one, especially since I am submitting the security camera footage to the district attorney right now. I hung up the phone and blocked his number again. I walked over to the pile of bags. On the stairs, picked up my gold Birkin and dusted it off. It had a small scratch on the leather, a battle scar. I smiled, slinging it over my shoulder. I still had a wedding to crash, and I needed to look my best because the real show was just getting started. The morning after Jessica's arrest brought a strange calmness to my life, but I knew the storm was far from over. Derek was a man who operated on ego, and when his ego was bruised, he did not retreat. He doubled down. He needed a win. He needed to prove to everyone, especially himself, that losing me and losing access to my house was just a minor setback in his grand rise to power. And nothing screams power quite like booking the Rosewood Estate for a wedding that was happening in less than a week. The Rosewood Estate was not just a wedding venue, it was an institution in our city. It was a sprawling historic manor built in the 1920s by the first black female millionaire in the state. It represented legacy, dignity, and old money, the kind of money that whispers, while Derek money screamed. The waiting list to get married at Rosewood was typically 2 years long, and the vetting process was stricter than joining a country club. You did not just pay to get into Rosewood, you had to be accepted. I sat in my office watching the surveillance feed from the venue security system. I had access, not because I was a bride, but because my private equity firm had quietly acquired the estate 3 years ago, saving it from foreclosure. I was the majority shareholder, the silent owner whose name was on the deed, locked away in a safe that Derek knew nothing about. To him, Rosewood was just the most expensive place in town, the place where he could take photos that would make his Instagram followers jealous. I watched as Derek pulled up to the manor gates in a rented Lamborghini, clearly trying to compensate for the fact that his G-Wagon was currently sitting in an impound lot. Tiffany was with him, of course, wearing oversized sunglasses and looking at the historic architecture with the bored expression of someone who only cared about lighting angles. They walked up the stone steps like they owned the place, Derek barking orders at the valet before pushing open the heavy oak doors. Inside, Mr. Thompson, the estate manager, was waiting. He was a man of impeccable grace and standards, a man who had seen generations of true wealth walk through those halls I had called him 10 minutes prior, warning him of the impending circus. "He is here," Mr. Thompson had whispered over the phone. Sophia looking at his financial preliminary report. This man cannot afford the valet parking, let alone the grand ballroom. His credit check is showing multiple recent inquiries and a debt-to-income ratio that is frankly alarming. Should I turn him away? No, I had replied, leaning back in my leather chair, giving the command that would seal Derek's fate. Do the opposite. Mr. Thompson, roll out the red carpet. Offer him the Diamond Jubilee package, the one we usually reserve for royalty and heads of state. Tell him it became available due to a last-minute cancellation. Make him feel special. Make him feel like a king. And then, Mr. Thompson, make him sign the contract with the absolute forfeiture clause. The forfeiture clause was a legal bear trap. It stated that for last-minute bookings, 100% of the estimated cost was due within 48 hours, and the initial deposit was completely non-refundable under any circumstances. Absolutely no exceptions. I watched on the screen as Mr. Thompson executed the plan perfectly. He greeted Derek with a warm smile, ignoring Derek. Rude demand for sparkling water immediately. Mr. Brooks, Mr. Thompson said, his voice smooth. Welcome to Rosewood. We were expecting you. Derek puffed out his chest, adjusting his suit jacket. I assume you know who I am. I want the best you have, the ballroom, the garden, the entire estate. My fiancé deserves the world, and I am the man who can give it to her. Tiffany giggled, clinging to his arm, looking around at the crystal chandeliers. Oh, babe, this is perfect. It is so much better than that stuffy place you married Sophia in. I flinched slightly, but kept watching. Our wedding had been in a botanical garden, intimate and beautiful. But to them, anything that did not cost 6 figures was cheap. Mr. Thompson nodded solemnly. Actually, Mr. Brooks, luck is on your side. We had a sudden cancellation for this coming Saturday. The Diamond Jubilee package is available. It includes the full estate buyout, a 5-course meal prepared by our Michelin star chef, and uninterrupted access for 12 hours. The cost is $150,000. I saw Derek flinch just for a second. His eyes widened, and he swallowed hard. 150,000 was more money than he had ever seen in one place, without my signature on a check. But then he looked at Tiffany, who was looking at him with wide, expectant eyes, and he looked at Mr. Thompson, who was waiting with polite patience. That is fine, Derek said, his voice cracking slightly before he cleared his throat. Money is no object for the Brooks legacy. We will take it. Excellent, Mr. Thompson said, sliding a heavy leather-bound folio across the antique desk. We just need a signature here, and here. And of course the initial deposit of $50,000 to lock in the date. The remaining $100,000 will be automatically drafted from your card on file 48 hours before the event. $50,000 liquid cash. It was everything Derek had left. I knew his finances better than he did. He had drained our joint savings account the day before. I froze it, withdrawing exactly $52,000, thinking he was being clever, hiding cash from the divorce lawyers. He was about to hand over 95% of his liquidity for a party he would never finish paying for. I saw him hesitate again. His hand hovered over his wallet. He knew this was reckless. He knew he was walking a tightrope without a net, but his arrogance was heavier than his fear. He pulled out a stack of cashier's checks and slapped them onto the desk. There, Derek said, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. 50,000. Consider it done. Mr. Thompson took the checks, verifying them with agonizing slowness before nodding. The date is yours, Mr. Brooks. Welcome to the Rosewood family. Derek signed the contract with a flourish, not reading a single word of the fine print. He did not read the clause about the non-refundable nature of the deposit. He did not read the clause about the venue, right to cancel for insolvency. He just signed, believing that the credit cards I had not yet fully declined would cover the rest. As they walked out, Derek looked triumphant. He pulled Tiffany close, and I could read his lips on the high-definition camera. See, babe, he said. I told you I would make it happen. Sophia could never dream of a wedding like this. We are going to be the kings of this city. I closed the laptop screen, feeling a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. He had just paid $50,000 for a venue owned by his ex-wife. He had just funded his own destruction. The wire transfer hit the Rosewood account minutes later. I immediately moved those funds into a protected holding account. Derek was technically right about one thing. Sophia could never dream of a wedding like this, because Sophia would never be stupid enough to spend her last dime on a facade. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Mr. Thompson. Well done. Proceed with the preparations. Let him taste the luxury, and set the automatic charge for the remaining balance to hit his business card at exactly 5 p.m. on Friday. Friday was the day before the wedding. It was also the day I planned to drop the final hammer on his business accounts. Derek thought he had secured the venue, but all he had secured was a front-row seat to his own financial funeral. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the mouse was currently celebrating in a rented car, unaware that the cage door had already slammed shut. Las Vegas was supposed to be the victory lap, the grand procession where Derek established himself as the new king of the Strip, without his queen dragging him down. He had chartered a private jet for him and his 5 groomsmen, a mix of old college buddies and new opportunists, who only hung around him because they thought he was bankrolling the next big tech startup. The flight itself had gone smoothly, mostly because I allowed the charges for the jet fuel and the catering to go through on the business account. I wanted him to feel invincible. I wanted him to fly high, so the fall would be that much more devastating. But the moment the wheels touched the tarmac at Harry Reid International Airport, the cracks began to appear, and they started small hairline fractures in the facade of his manufactured life. It started with the ride to the hotel. Derek had insisted on booking 3 luxury SUVs to transport the group to the Bellagio, refusing the shuttle service, like a peasant. He stood on the curb, wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer tracksuit that still had the tags tucked inside, snapping his fingers at the drivers directing them to load the luggage. The ride was short, filled with loud music and louder bragging about the weekend ahead. Derek was telling everyone about the crypto investments he was about to cash out, about how the wedding at Rosewood was just the beginning of his empire. When they arrived at the hotel entrance, the lead driver lowered the partition and asked for the payment to be finalized. Derek pulled out his personal gold card, the one he used for everyday expenses like gas and groceries. He handed it over with a dismissive wave, barely looking at the man. A moment later, the driver cleared his throat. "Excuse me, sir, this card has been declined." The laughter in the back of the SUV stopped abruptly. Derek frowned, leaning forward. "Try it again. It is a gold card. Limits are not an issue for me." The driver swiped it again, louder this time. The machine beeped a harsh rejecting sound. "Declined code, 04 call issuer." Derek's face turned a shade of ash gray. He patted his pockets, laughing nervously, pulling out another card. "This is ridiculous. My bank always flags me when I travel. Security protocols, you know, trying to protect my millions. Try this one." The second card was his debit card, the one linked to the joint checking account I had emptied down to the minimum balance requirement exactly 24 hours ago. Declined insufficient funds. Now the silence in the car was deafening. His friends were exchanging glances, the kind of looks that said, maybe the rumors were true. Maybe Derek was all talk. Derek felt the heat of their judgment burning into the back of his neck. He quickly spun the narrative, pivoting into the role of the victim, which was his second favorite role after the hero. "It is Sophia," he growled, slamming his hand against the leather seat. "She is freezing my assets illegally. She is bitter because I moved on, so she is hacking my accounts to embarrass me. I am going to sue her for every dime she has when we get back. Kevin, cover this for me, will you? I will wire you the cash as soon as I get my lawyer on the phone." Kevin, his college roommate and a man who had borrowed money from Derek for years, sighed and pulled out his own credit card. "Fine, but you are good for it, right? This is a $300 ride." Derek laughed, forcing the bravado back into his voice. 300? That is pocket change, brother. Do not insult me. I just need to get this hold lifted. Once I call the bank, We are popping bottles all night on me." He was lying, of course. He knew he could not call the bank because the bank would tell him that the primary account holder, Ms. Sophia Carter, had reported the cards lost and requested a full freeze pending a fraud investigation. He was stranded in the desert with nothing but a suit he could not return and a business card that was ticking time bomb while Derek was sweating in the hotel lobby trying to check in using the business card, which thankfully for him still had the pre-authorization approval from my trap. Tiffany was upstairs in the suite, engaging in her own performance art. Tiffany had not flown on the private jet. She had flown commercial in economy and met him there, but her Instagram story told a very different narrative. She was currently live streaming to her 4,000 followers, holding a glass of champagne she had taken from the minibar, panning the camera around the opulent suite. "Hey guys," she cooed, posing in the mirror, showing off the ring that was charged to a fraudulent account. "Look at this view. Derek treats me like a absolute princess. We are just settling in before the big dinner tonight. Vegas, baby. The wedding countdown is on, and honestly, I just feel so blessed to be marrying a man who knows how to provide." She ended the live stream with a kiss to the camera, and immediately her smile dropped. The champagne glass was empty and her stomach was growling. She had not eaten since the flight because she did not want to spend her own cash at the airport. She walked over to the room service menu, her mouth watering at the description of the lobster mac and cheese and the Wagyu sliders. She picked up the phone and placed an order for $200 worth of food, asking for it to be charged to the room. 10 minutes later, the room phone rang, expecting it to be the kitchen. Confirming her order, she answered with a demanding tone. "I said no, onions on the burger, Ms. Brooks, or excuse me, Ms. Miller." The receptionist voice was polite but firm. "We are unable to process the room service charge. The card on file for incidentals has been declined. We need you to come down to the front desk and provide a valid form of payment, or we will have to lock the minibar." Tiffany slammed the phone down, screaming into a pillow. She checked her own bank account balance. $42, barely enough to cover a salad in this hotel. She looked at the minibar trying to open it, but the electronic lock was already engaged. She was starving, surrounded by luxury she could not taste, trapped in a tower she did not own. She went to her suitcase and dug out the emergency stash she had packed. 3 cups of instant noodles. She went into the marble bathroom, filled the cup with hot water from the tap because the coffee maker looked too complicated, and sat on the edge of the jacuzzi tub, eating soggy noodles while scrolling through comments, telling her how lucky she was. Back in Chicago, my office was dark, illuminated only by the glow of 3 large monitors. I was not sleeping. I was working, or rather, I was watching the symphony of destruction I had composed, playing out in real time. On the left screen was the GPS tracker showing Derek's location at a high-end nightclub. On the right screen was the transaction log for Brooks Consulting. I watched as a charge came through for $10,000, bottle service at Omnia approved. Let it go through because that money was not coming out of my pocket. It was coming out of a business loan that Derek had personally guaranteed using his parents' house as collateral. He did not know that part of the contract because he never read contracts. He thought the business was standalone. But I had structured it so that any default would ripple through his entire family assets. Another charge, $5,000 for a VIP table. Approved. He was manic spending money he did not have, trying to prove to Kevin and the others that the Uber incident was just a glitch. He was drinking away his future 1 bottle of Grey Goose at a time. Then came the smaller charges, the attempts that failed. A charge for a pack of cigarettes at the club kiosk, declined. A charge for a tip to the bathroom attendant, declined. He was a man who could buy the club, but could not buy a pack of gum. It was a specific kind of torture, giving him the illusion of power while stripping him of his dignity. I pulled up the master spreadsheet. The total debt accumulated in the last 48 hours, including the Rosewood venue deposit. The Ring the Jet and Tonight Club bill had just crossed the $200,000 mark. I took a sip of water, watching the numbers turn red. This was the tipping point. In legal terms, this was now considered dissipation of assets, but since the business card was authorized for entertainment expenses, he was walking right into a trap of corporate embezzlement. I was not just going to divorce him, I was building a criminal case. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica. "You are pathetic," freezing his cards. "He is going to fix this. And when he does, you will never see a dime of his success. Enjoy your lonely night with your cats." I looked at the text and laughed softly. The projection was incredible. I was not lonely. I was exhilarated. I typed a reply but then deleted it. Jessica did not deserve a response. She deserved to find out along with everyone else. I turned back to the screen, watching a new transaction attempt appearing. A cash advance request at the casino ATM for $5,000 declined. Derek was trying to get gambling money, hoping to win back what he was spending. He was desperate. The cracks were not just in his finances anymore. They were in his mind. He was spiraling, and I was the only one with the parachute which I had set on fire hours ago. I closed the laptop and stood up, stretching my arms overhead. The bachelor party was a disaster. The bride was eating noodles in a bathtub, and the groom was racking up debt that would take 3 lifetimes to repay. It was time for me to get some sleep. I had a flight to catch in the morning. After all, I had to get to Rosewood to make sure my dress was pressed and ready. The show was entering its final act, and I did not want to miss the opening curtain. The courier arrived at my executive suite on Thursday afternoon, holding a box wrapped in heavy cream silk ribbon that was so excessive it looked like a prop from a bad romance movie. My assistant Marcus looked hesitant as he placed it on my glass desk, his eyes darting between the package and my face, knowing that nothing good ever came from the Brooks family in unrequested deliveries. The box was heavy-weighted, with expensive cardstock and pretension. I dismissed Marcus with a nod and reached for the silver letter opener, sliding it under the wax seal that was stamped with a crest Derek had invented 3 weeks ago, claiming it was his family ancestral coat of arms. Inside the box, nestled in a bed of imported preserved rose petals, was the invitation. It was engraved on a sheet of acrylic with gold leaf lettering spelling out the names: Derek Brooks and Tiffany Miller, inviting me to witness their union at the Rosewood estate. The sheer audacity of it made me pause. They were using my money to print an invitation on plastic that cost $20 a unit, just to invite me to a wedding I was secretly paying for, but the real weapon was not the invitation itself. It was the handwritten note tucked underneath on personalized stationery that smelled like Mama Joy's heavy floral perfume. I picked up the note, recognizing the looping cursive handwriting of my sister-in-law Jessica. Immediately, though I knew the words were a collaborative effort between her and Derek Mother. The note read, "Sophia, we thought you should come to see what a real woman looks like when she is being loved properly. It is important for you to understand that a career cannot keep a man warm at night. Consider this a lesson in humility. Love always." The family. I stared at the paper, feeling the familiar heat rising in my chest. They were not satisfied with taking my money or my house. They wanted to break my spirit. They wanted me to sit in the back row alone and bitter, watching them celebrate their victory. They wanted to see me cry, so they could point and whisper about how the cold corporate executive finally cracked. But they had miscalculated yet again. They assumed I would be too ashamed to show my face. They did not realize that shame is an emotion reserved for people who have done something wrong, and I had done nothing but finance their delusions. My office door opened, and Elena, the vice president of marketing, and my closest friend at the firm walked in carrying 2 lattes. She stopped when she saw the open box and the expression on my face. She walked over, picking up the note and reading it, her jaw tightening with every word. "This is not an invitation, Sophia," she said, tossing the note back into the box, like it was contaminated trash. "This is bait. They are baiting you. Do not tell me you are actually considering going to this circus. You should burn this and send the ashes back to them via courier. I picked up my latte, taking a slow, deliberate sip, watching the steam rise against the backdrop of the Chicago skyline. Elena was right. Of course, any rational person would stay home, order takeout, and pretend these people did not exist, but I was not. Feeling rational, I was feeling strategic. If I do not go, they win, I said calmly, looking at the gold leaf acrylic shining under the office lights. If I stay home, they will tell everyone I was too heartbroken to attend. They will spin a narrative that I am at home weeping over. Derek. They will control the story. And more importantly, Elena, I have a professional obligation to attend. Elena looked at me confused. Professional obligation. Sophia, he is your ex-husband, not a client. I stood up, walking to the window, looking down at the city where Derek was currently running up a tab on a credit card that was hours away from exploding. I am not going as an ex-wife, I corrected her, turning back with a smile that did not reach my eyes. I am going as the groom. Largest creditor. I own the venue. I own the debt. I own the car. His mother drove until yesterday. When you have invested nearly $500,000 into a failing startup, you attend the launch party to see where your money went. Elena stared at me for a moment before a slow grin spread across her face. You are terrifying, you know that? So if you are going, you cannot just show up. You have to arrive. Precisely, I replied, checking my watch. I have an appointment at the vault in 30 minutes. I need a dress. And not just a dress. Elena, I need a weapon. The Vault was an appointment-only boutique on Oak Street reserved for high-net-worth individuals who needed couture without the wait. The owner, Julian, knew me well. He had dressed me for galas and board meetings, but when I walked in that afternoon, he sensed immediately that this was different. I did not want a power suit, and I did not want a polite cocktail dress. I explained the situation briefly, leaving out the legal details, but emphasizing the emotional context. Julian nodded, his eyes lighting up with the artistic challenge. He disappeared into the back and returned with a garment bag that looked heavy. He unzipped it, revealing a gown that made the air in the room shift. It was a custom piece, deep crimson red, the color of blood and victory. It was structured with a sharp architectural neckline that showcased my collarbones and a silhouette that fit like a second skin before flaring out into a dramatic train. The fabric was silk crepe, hand-dyed and woven with subtle metallic threads that caught the light with every movement. "This is not a dress for a guest," Julian said softly as I stepped onto the podium. "This is a dress for the main character. It screams that you are not mourning, you are thriving." When I looked in the mirror, I did not see the woman who had cried over negative pregnancy tests, or the woman who had begged for her husband attention. I saw a woman who had built an empire from nothing. I saw Sophia, the CFO, the owner, the power. The red dress against my dark skin was striking, bold and unapologetic. It was better than the bride dress, I knew that for a fact, because I had seen the invoice for Tiffany dress on the credit card statement. It was an off-the-rack gown from a mid-tier bridal salon that she had spent $3,000 to alter. I was about to walk into her wedding wearing a $20,000 custom couture piece. I bought the dress instantly, along with a pair of diamond drop earrings that cost more than Derek Carr. I was done saving. I was done being the frugal, responsible wife. If they wanted to talk about money, I would show them what real money looked like. Not the credit card debt kind, but the kind that owns the building. That night, I lay in bed in my temporary apartment, visualizing the next day. I could imagine the whispers when I walked in. I could picture Jessica face-dropping when she saw that her attempt to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly. They expected a funeral, but I was bringing a fashion show. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from Derek, presumably sent from the bathroom while Tiffany was asleep. "Hey, just saw you got the invite. Hope you come. No hard feelings, right? Just want you to see I am happy, maybe. You can learn something about how to treat a man." I stared at the screen for a long moment. The old Sophia would have typed out a paragraph of angry text messages reminding him of everything I did for him. The old Sophia would have been hurt. But the new Sophia simply swiped the message away and turned off the phone. I did not need to reply with words. My reply was hanging in the garment bag on the back of the door. My reply was the foreclosure notice that was currently being processed by the bank. My reply was the security team at Rosewood who answered to me. I closed my eyes and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The kind of sleep you get when you know the check is about to clear and the balance is finally going to be settled. The invitation said. The ceremony began at 6 o'clock. I planned to arrive at 6:15 fashionably late and just in time to watch the house of cards come tumbling down. The sun rose over the Rosewood estate on Saturday morning with a brilliance that felt almost mocking, bathing the manicured lawns and the limestone facade in a golden light that photographers usually had to use filters to achieve. It was the kind of day that brides dream of, a day where the air smelled of imported white hydrangeas and sweet grass and the promise of happily ever after. Inside the main ballroom, the staff was moving with military precision, erecting a 10-foot tower of crystal champagne flutes and draping tables in silk linens that cost more per yard than most people earned in a week. It was a scene of absolute perfection, a masterclass in luxury event planning, funded entirely by an account that had hit zero exactly 12 hours prior. Inside the groom's suite, however, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Derek stood in front of the full-length mirror, his hands shaking so violently that he had been trying to button his left cufflink for 5 minutes without success. He was wearing a custom tuxedo that he had picked up yesterday, a rush order that he had bullied the tailor into releasing without final payment by flashing his business card and promising a wire transfer. The tailor, intimidated by Derek's aggressive posturing, and the Brooks family name had relented, but the anxiety of that confrontation still lingered on Derek's skin like a film of sweat. His phone sat on the velvet ottoman buzzing incessantly. It was not congratulatory texts. It was the notifications from the bank app, each one a digital hammer blow to his fragile reality. The first sign of the impending avalanche happened at 9 in the morning, when the head florist asked for the final settlement on the orchid installation. She had approached Derek with a portable card reader. A polite smile plastered on her face, explaining that per the contract, the remaining balance of $15,000 was due upon delivery. Derek had laughed a tight, nervous sound and tapped his business card against the machine, confident that the corporate veil would protect him. But the machine had chirped that hateful little sound. Declined code 05 refer to issuer. He had blamed the reception. He had blamed the chip, but the florist's smile had grown tight and she had stopped her team from unloading the centerpiece for the head table. Now Derek was alone, pacing the plush carpet, trying desperately to get a human being on the phone at the bank. He dialed the customer service number for the 4th time, listening to the upbeat jazz, hold music that made him want to throw the phone through the window. Finally, a representative answered. Security verification required. The automated voice said, "Please state your mother's maiden name, Johnson." Derek shouted into the phone, his patience gone. "I am sorry that entry does not match our records," the voice replied cheerfully. "Please try again." Derek froze. Johnson was his mother's maiden name. It had been the security answer for 10 years. He tried again, speaking slower, enunciating every syllable. Johnson, Johnsson. Access denied. For your protection, this account has been locked due to multiple failed security attempts. Please visit a branch with 2 forms of identification to restore access. Derek dropped the phone onto the ottoman, his knees giving out as he sank into the leather chair. Sophia. Of course it was Sophia. She had changed the security questions. She must have done it days ago, anticipating exactly this moment he was locked out. He could not move money, he could not approve charges, he could not even check to see if the wire transfer for the catering had bounced, which he knew in his gut it had. The door to the suite swung open, and Jessica walked in, looking triumphant in a gold sequined gown that was aggressively flashy. She was carrying a bottle of champagne. She had likely bullied a waiter into opening early. "Derek, why do you look like you are waiting for execution instead of a wedding?" she asked, pouring a glass and shoving it into his hand. "Drink up. The guests are arriving. I just saw the mayor car pull up. We are making a statement today, little brother." Derek looked at her, his eyes wide with panic. "Jessica, the cards are not working. None of them." The florist almost walked with the orchids. "I cannot get into the bank account. Sophia changed the codes. I have zero access. The caterer is going to ask for the check in an hour, and I have nothing." Jessica paused the glass halfway to her lips. She looked at him not with sympathy, but with annoyance. She set the glass down and walked over, grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him slightly. "Pull yourself together," she hissed. "You are a Brooks. We do not panic over technical difficulties. Listen to me. Derek, look at where you are. You are at the Rosewood estate. The flowers are already up. The champagne is already poured. Do you really think the staff is going to tear down the wedding in the middle of the ceremony because of a declined card? They are terrified of bad press. They are terrified of us. But the money?" Derek whispered, his voice trembling. "It is not there, Jessica. It is gone." "It does not matter," Jessica said firmly, fixing his bow tie with aggressive tugs. "You sign whatever piece of paper they put in front of you. You act offended that they would even ask. You tell them your accountant handles the weekend settlements and they will get a wire on Monday. By Monday, you will be married. You will be legally untouchable. And we will figure out how to force Sophia to unlock the accounts later. She is just playing games, trying to scare you. If you stop the wedding now, she wins." "Do you want her to win?" Derek shook his head slowly, the image of Sophia's smug face fueling his anger, overpowering his fear. "No. Then get out there," Jessica commanded. "Go greet the guests. Act like you own the place because for all intents and purposes you do. This is your day, Derek. Do not let a little plastic card ruin the biggest moment of your life. Once that ring is on, Tiffany finger, it is done. The deal is sealed." Her words were a sedative, a dangerous, intoxicating drug that numbed his common sense. He straightened his jacket, taking a deep breath. Jessica was right. Appearance was everything. If he looked rich, if he acted rich, the world would bend to his will. It always had before. He grabbed the glass of champagne and downed it in one gulp, feeling the liquid courage burn his throat. "I am going to handle it," Derek said, his voice regaining some of its usual arrogance. "Let them try to stop me." Outside in the hallway, the sounds of the string quartet warming up drifted through the air, beautiful and haunting. Derek checked his reflection one last time, adjusting the lapels of his stolen suit. He walked out of the suite, leaving his phone behind, burying the notifications of financial ruin under a velvet cushion. He walked towards the ballroom, greeted by the smiles of staff members who were currently whispering into their headsets about the payment status. But he ignored them. He was Derek Brooks, and he was about to get married in the wedding of the century. Meanwhile, down in the main kitchen, the executive chef was staring at a printed receipt that had just spit out of the point-of-sale system. Transaction void. Insufficient funds. He picked up the phone to call the general manager, Mr. Thompson, but paused when he saw a text message on his personal phone. It was from the owner of the estate, a number he had saved under VIP. "Serve the food. Let the ceremony proceed. Do not interrupt them until the knife touches the cake. Wait for my signal." The chef deleted the text and turned back to his team, screaming for the lobster bisque to be plated immediately. The machinery of the wedding churned on, fueled not by money, but by the silent, orchestrated permission of the woman Derek thought he had left behind. The trap was fully set. The guests were seated, and the chaos was just beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to erupt. The music swelled, the doors opened, and the procession began walking on a carpet of rose petals that led straight off a cliff. The string quartet switched from a low murmuring hum to the opening notes of Pachelbel Canon in D major, a cliché choice that perfectly matched the lack of originality in Derek New Life. The heavy double doors of the Rosewood Garden entrance swung open, and the collective gasp of the 300 guests was audible. It was the reaction Derek had paid for, or rather the reaction he had charged to a card that was currently flashing red on a server somewhere in Delaware. Tiffany stood at the top of the aisle, and I had to admit she made a statement. The dress was not a garment. It was an architecture of tulle and lace, encrusted with so many crystals that she practically vibrated in the afternoon sun. It was the kind of dress that screamed, "Look at the price tag. Do not look at the person wearing it." As she began her slow walk down the aisle, clutching a bouquet of imported peonies that cost more than her first car, the guests craned their necks, whispering behind manicured hands. To the outside observer, this was a fairy tale. The handsome, successful businessman waiting at the altar, the young, beautiful bride walking toward her future. But to me, watching from the periphery, it looked like a hostage exchange. Derek was not looking at Tiffany with love. He was looking at her with desperate relief. She was his human shield. She was the living, breathing proof that he was not a failure, that he could still attract a trophy, that he could still close the deal. Derek stood at the altar, shifting his weight from foot to foot, wiping a bead of sweat from his upper lip, hoping people would mistake his terror for anticipation. He watched Tiffany approach, and for a moment his panic subsided, replaced by that familiar arrogance. She was almost there. Just a few more steps and the ring would be on her finger, and legally in his mind, the debt would somehow become a shared burden, or better yet, disappear into the myth of the Brooks family fortune. He smoothed the lapels of the tuxedo he had bullied the tailor into releasing and put on his best performance smile. In the front row, Mama Joyce was already performing her own one-woman show. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, making sure everyone saw her display of overwhelming maternal emotion. She turned her head slightly, scanning the back rows, looking for the one thing that would make her victory complete. Me. She had insisted on saving a seat for me right in the back row, a single empty chair with a reserved sign on it, just to highlight my absence. She wanted the empty seat to be a symbol of my defeat, a physical representation of the woman who was not good enough to keep her son. But as she scanned the crowd and saw the empty chair, she let out a small, satisfied sigh, turning back to face the altar, believing she had finally exorcised me from their lives. Tiffany reached the altar, her face flushed with excitement and the heat of the day. She handed her bouquet to her maid of honor, a girl from her sorority who looked equally bored and envious, and took Derek's hands. They looked like the perfect couple atop a wedding cake, plastic and hollow. The officiant, a pastor, Mama Joyce had handpicked because he preached prosperity gospel, began the ceremony speaking in booming tones about destiny and divine favor, words that felt heavy with irony, given that the check for his honorarium was destined to bounce on Monday morning. Then came the vows. This was the moment Derek had been waiting for. He had written them himself, or rather he had dictated them to Jessica, who had polished them into a weapon. He pulled a small leather-bound notebook from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the microphone echoing across the silent garden. Tiffany Derek began, his voice gaining strength as he fell into the rhythm of his own narcissism. From the moment I met you, I knew you were different. You were a breath of fresh air in a life that had become stale and suffocated by expectations. You looked at me and saw a man, not a bank account, not a project to be managed, but a leader to be followed. A few guests in the front row dabbed their eyes, moved by the performance. Mama Joyce nodded vigorously, murmuring amen under her breath. I promise to cherish you. Derek continued, looking deep into Tiffany's eyes. but pitching his voice so it carried to the back of the room, intentionally loud. I promise to honor your softness. In a world where women try to be hard, where they try to wear the pants and run the boardroom, I found sanctuary in your femininity. I promise to always be the provider, to be the rock, so you never have to worry about a spreadsheet or a bottom line. I felt the air in the garden shift slightly. The women in the audience, successful doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs, shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing the misogyny wrapped in romance. But Derek was on a roll, fueled by the adrenaline of his own deception. I vow to love you simply, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. I vow to love, woman who knows that her greatest career is our family. A woman who does not put her ambition above her husband. A woman who knows how to spend my money with grace and gratitude instead of hoarding it out of fear. You have taught me that true wealth is not in a portfolio. It is in the way you look at me with absolute trust. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. It was a direct strike, a calculated humiliation directed at the ghost of his ex-wife. He was painting me as the cold, hoarding villain and Tiffany as the virtuous, warm heroine. He was rewriting our history in front of 300 witnesses, blaming me for his financial insecurity, framing my financial literacy as stinginess, and his reckless spending as generosity. Tiffany beamed, blinking back tears, completely unaware that the man promising to be her provider could not currently afford the gas in the rental car parked out front. "Oh, Derek," she whispered, leaning into the microphone. "I promise to be your queen, to let you lead, to make our home a place of peace, not business. I promise to never question your vision because I know you will always take care of us." Mama. Joyce let out a loud sob, unable to contain herself anymore. She looked over her shoulder one last time at the empty chair, her eyes gleaming with malice. "See," she seemed to say. "See what you lost, Sophia. This is what a real marriage looks like." She nudged Jessica, who was sitting next to her, looking smug in her gold dress, and they shared a look of pure, toxic triumph. They truly believed they had pulled it off. They believed the vows had been spoken, the narrative had been set, and the past had been buried under a mountain of white roses and lies. Derek closed his vow book, feeling the high of the moment. He had done it. He had humiliated me, elevated himself, and secured his new life. The fear of the declined cards and the locked bank accounts faded into the background, pushed away by the applause of the crowd. He squeezed Tiffany's hands tighter, feeling invincible, feeling like the king of Rosewood. And then the officiant smiled, oblivious to the war that was being waged beneath the surface of the polite society gathering. "Do you, Derek, take Tiffany to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the pastor asked, his voice booming. "I do," Derek said, almost shouting it, looking out at the crowd, challenging anyone to defy him. "And do you, Tiffany, take Derek to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Tiffany squealed, practically bouncing on her heels. The crowd erupted in soft coos of adoration, captivated by the show. The birds sang, the fountain trickled, and for a fleeting second the illusion held perfectly. But illusions are fragile things, especially when they are built on a foundation of stolen credit and deceit. As the pastor opened his mouth to pronounce them husband and wife, a shadow fell across the back of the garden. The sound of gravel crunching under tires broke the sanctity of the moment, followed by the heavy thud of a car door closing. Not a guest car, but something heavier, something official. But nobody turned around yet. They were too focused on the kiss that was about to happen, too focused on the lie to notice that the truth had just arrived, and she was wearing red. The sound of the heavy oak doors at the back of the garden swinging open was not a polite creak, but a commanding thud that echoed like a gavel striking a judge bench. It broke the hypnotic spell of the ceremony, instantly causing 300 heads to turn in unison, creating a wave of rustling silk and linen. The officiant stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open slightly as the silence stretched tight across the lawn. The air, which had been filled with the scent of roses and expensive perfume, suddenly felt charged with electricity, the kind of atmospheric shift that happens right before a lightning strike. I stood framed in the archway, silhouetted against the afternoon sun for a heartbeat, allowing the image to burn into their retinas. I was not the weeping broken ex-wife they had expected to read about in the gossip columns. I was not the woman huddled at home in sweatpants, mourning the loss of a man who was barely worth the price of his tuxedo. I was a vision of absolute, unadulterated power. The crimson custom gown flowed around me like liquid fire, the metallic threads catching the sunlight and turning me into a beacon that was impossible to ignore. I took my first step onto the limestone path, and the sound of my heels clicking against the stone was the only sound in the entire world. Click, click, click. I walked with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a predator who knows the prey has nowhere to run. I did not look at the ground. I did not look at the guests. I kept my eyes locked on the altar where Derek stood frozen, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure, melting in the heat. The smile that had been plastered on his face moments ago had vanished, replaced by a look of primal terror that I had only ever seen once before when the IRS had audited his first failed business. As I moved closer, the whispers began. It started as a low hum in the back rows and swept forward like a brush fire. I could hear individual voices, distinct and shocked, cutting through the quiet. Is that Sophia, a woman in an oversized hat, whispered loudly to her neighbor, clutching her pearls. I thought they said she was devastated. She looks like she just bought the whole block. Wait, isn't not that the CEO of Carter Capital? A man in a navy suit murmured, leaning forward, his eyes wide. That is the woman who brokered the downtown merger last month. She looks incredible, much better than the bride if you ask me. The comparison was inevitable and it was brutal. Tiffany, standing at the altar in her mass-produced dress, with its excessive crystals, suddenly looked cheap. In the presence of true couture, in the presence of a woman who wore her success like armor, Tiffany looked like a child playing dress-up in her mother's closet. The guests sensed it too. The admiration for the fairy-tale wedding evaporated, replaced by the awe of witnessing a queen enter the room. The pity they had prepared for me dissolved instantly, turning into respect, and a hunger for the drama that was unfolding. I saw Mama, Joyce, in the front row, her jaw unhinged, her eyes bulging as if she were seeing a ghost. She gripped Jessica's arm so hard I could see her knuckles turn white. Jessica looked like she had swallowed a lemon, her face contorted in a mix of jealousy and confusion. She had spent weeks telling everyone I was a frumpy workaholic who did not know how to be feminine. And here I was, outshining every woman in the venue without saying a word. I continued my walk, ignoring the usher who tried to step forward to guide me to a seat. He took one look at my face and the steely determination in my eyes, and he retreated, melting back into the shadows. I did not go to the back row. I did not go to the single chair they had reserved for me as an insult. I walked straight down the center aisle, the aisle that was meant for the bride alone, cutting through the heart of their ceremony like a knife. Derek's hands began to shake violently. He looked from me to the guests, seeing their eyes widen, seeing the shift in their allegiance. He realized in that moment that he was losing the room. He was losing the narrative. He tried to laugh, to play it off, but it came out as a strangled choke. Sophia, he finally managed to say, his voice cracking over the microphone amplification. What are you doing here? I did not stop walking. I was 20 feet away, then 15, then 10. I could see the sweat dripping down his temple. I could see the panic in Tiffany's eyes as she realized her big moment was being hijacked. Derek looked at the officiant, then at his mother, desperate for someone to intervene, for someone to save him from the woman he had underestimated for 5 years. When no one moved, when the pastor simply stared at me in stunned silence, Derek snapped. The facade of the cool, wealthy groom shattered completely, revealing the scared little boy underneath security. He screamed, his voice high and shrill, breaking the spell of my approach. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face turning a blotchy red. "Get her out of here! Her out of... Someone call security. She is not on the list. She is trespassing. Remove her now." The outburst was ugly. It was raw and undignified. The guests recoiled, shocked by his loss of control. A groom is supposed to be composed. He is supposed to be gracious. But Derek was screaming like a toddler, throwing a tantrum. He looked around wildly, expecting the large men in black suits to rush forward and drag me away, expecting to see me humiliated and thrown out the front gates. But nothing happened. The security guards stationed at the perimeter stood perfectly still, their hands clasped behind their backs, looking straight ahead. They did not move toward me. They did not reach for their radios. They simply watched, waiting for the orders that mattered, and those orders did not come from the man standing at the altar. In an unpaid suit, Derek's scream echoed into the silence, hanging there like a foul smell. "Security!" he yelled again, louder this time, desperation creeping into his tone. I said, "Get her out, she is... Get! Ruining my wedding. Why is nobody moving?" I stopped walking. Finally, standing at the base of the altar steps. I was close enough to smell the cheap cologne he had bathed in, close enough to see the fear in his eyes. I did not shout. I did not raise my hands. I simply stood there in my red dress, a monolith of justice, amidst their garden of lies. I looked up at him, tilting my head slightly, offering him a small, cold smile that did not reach my eyes. The guests leaned in, holding their breath, waiting for my response, waiting to see what the woman who held the purse strings would do next. Derek was panting now, looking at the security guards in confusion, not understanding why his commands were falling on deaf ears, not understanding that in the hierarchy of power, the person who signs the checks always outranks the person who makes the noise. The silence that followed Derek's screaming demand was heavy enough to crush a lesser man. But Derek was running on pure adrenaline and delusion. He stood there, with his arm extended, pointing at me, waiting for the massive security guards to tackle me to the ground and drag me out like an unruly teenager at a concert. The head of security, a man named Marcus who stood 6 feet 5 inches tall and was built like a tank, slowly uncrossed his hands from behind his back. He adjusted his earpiece and began to walk toward the altar. The sound of his heavy boots crunching on the gravel was rhythmic and ominous. Derek let out a breath of relief, a smug smile returning to his face, thinking his order was finally being obeyed. He looked at Tiffany and winked, a gesture so premature and arrogant it almost made me laugh. "Thank you," Derek said loudly, as Marcus approached the steps. "Finally, someone who knows how to do their job. Get this woman out of my sight and make sure she is banned from the property permanently." Marcus walked up the limestone steps, his shadow falling over Derek. He walked past the groom, completely ignoring him as if he were nothing more than a piece of decorative furniture. Marcus stopped directly in front of me, and for a second, the entire garden held its breath, wondering if I was about to be handcuffed. But then Marcus did something that made 300 jaws drop simultaneously. He bowed. It was not a quick nod. It was a respectful, deliberate bow from the waist, the kind reserved for royalty or high-ranking officials. When he straightened up, he looked me directly in the eye with a look of absolute deference. "Good evening, Ms. Carter," Marcus said, his deep voice carrying clearly in the silence. "We were not expecting you to inspect the property today. The staff is at your disposal." Derek's face went slack. The color drained from his skin, leaving him looking like wet paper mache. He stepped forward, his voice trembling with confusion. "What are you doing?" Derek sputtered, grabbing Marcus by the arm. A mistake that Marcus corrected by gently but firmly removing Derek's hand without even looking at him. "I hired you. I am the client. Arrest her. She is trespassing." Marcus turned slowly to face Derek, his expression bored. "Sir, you are the customer renting the facility for the day. Ms. Carter is the majority shareholder of the private equity group that owns the Rosewood estate. She is not trespassing, she is standing in her own backyard. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. It started in the front row where the VIPs realized the power dynamic had just shifted tectonically and rippled all the way to the back where the servers were trying to hide their smiles. I watched the realization hit Derek like a physical blow. He looked at the mansion behind him, then at the grounds, and finally at me. He had spent months bragging about securing the most exclusive venue in the city, never knowing he was writing checks to his ex-wife. I stepped past Marcus and walked up to the altar, joining the unhappy couple. The pastor, who had been clutching the microphone like a lifeline, backed away, sensing that his authority had been superseded, reached out and took the microphone from his hand. The feedback squealed for a split second, a harsh electronic screech that made everyone wince before settling into a hum. I looked out at the sea of faces, recognizing business partners, former friends and family members who had sided with Derek. I saw the mix of shock and awe in their eyes. I saw the way they leaned forward, hungry for the truth. I apologized for the interruption. I said, my voice steady and amplified, booming across the garden, echoing off the stone walls of the estate. I know you are all eager to get to the cake cutting, but as the owner of this establishment, I have a fiduciary duty to maintain the standards of the Rosewood estate. We pride ourselves on exclusivity and excellence, but we also have strict policies regarding solvency. I turned to face Derek, who was shaking his head, muttering no, over and over again like a broken record. Tiffany had taken a step back, distancing herself from him, her eyes darting around looking for an exit. Mr. Brooks. I continued, my voice turning colder, hard as steel. You seem to be under the impression that this wedding is paid for. However, my financial team just informed me that the deposit you placed was merely a hold. The remaining balance of $300,000 scheduled to be auto-drafted an hour ago has been declined for insufficient funds. The crowd erupted. Whispers turned into shouts. People were pulling out their phones, recording the moment, live streaming the downfall of the Brooks dynasty. Derek looked like he was going to vomit. He reached for Tiffany's hand, but she snatched it away, clutching her bouquet to her chest like a shield. That is a lie, Derek screamed, his voice cracking, his desperation echoing through the speakers. It is a banking error. Sophia is doing this. She hacked the system. I smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile. Actually, Derek, it is not a hacking error. It is a policy. Under the Rosewood Contract section, 14 paragraph B, any event with an outstanding balance exceeding $50,000 must be settled in full prior to the ceremonial vows, or the event is immediately terminated, considering the client is in breach of contract. I paused, letting the legal weight of my words sink in. I looked at the guests, who were now looking at Derek with disgust. Not because he was broke, but because he was a fraud. They could forgive a sinner, but they could never forgive a man who pretended to be rich while spending their social capital. So I continued, unless you have $300,000 in cash or a valid credit card right now, I am afraid I have to ask you to vacate the premises. The reception has been canceled. The kitchen has been instructed to stop service, and security will be escorting you to your vehicle. It was the final nail in the coffin. The humiliation was absolute. Derek stood there, stripped of his lies, exposed as a man who had built a castle on quicksand. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. But Jessica was not defeated. She was enraged. She had been sitting in the front row, vibrating with fury, watching her brother, humiliation, and by extension her own social suicide. She stood up, her gold-sequined dress flashing in the sun, and let out a primal scream that sounded more animal than human. "You witch!" she shrieked, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "You planned this, you jealous, bitter witch. You want him back, and you cannot stand that he is happy." She kicked off her heels and lunged toward the altar, moving faster than I anticipated. She ran up the limestone steps. Her hands clawed into talons, aiming for my face, aiming to tear down the woman who dared to shame her family. Derek did not stop her. Mama, Joyce did not stop her. The guests gasped, some rising to their feet in horror. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply watched her come, knowing that I was protected, knowing that I was untouchable. Before she could get within 5 feet of me, Marcus moved. He did not tackle her. He simply stepped into her path like a wall. Jessica slammed into his chest with a thud that was audible over the microphone. She bounced off him, losing her balance and flailing her arms, trying to grab onto something to steady herself. But there was nothing to grab. She fell backward, tumbling down the 3 stone steps, landing in a heap of gold sequins and humiliation on the grass, right at the feet of the mother of the bride. Security, Marcus said calmly, speaking into his wrist microphone. We have a code. Red Escort, the sister of the groom. Off the premises, immediately. Assault on the owner. 2 more guards materialized from the shadows, lifting Jessica up by her arms as she kicked and screamed, cursing my name, threatening to sue, threatening to kill me. It was a scene of utter chaos, a stark contrast to the elegance of the venue. As they dragged her away, her screams fading into the distance, I looked back at Derek. He was staring at the spot where his sister had fallen, his mouth open, his eyes vacant, looked at me, and for the first time I saw genuine fear. He realized that this was not just a breakup. This was not just a divorce. This was an eviction from the life he thought he deserved. I brought the microphone back to my lips, my voice calm, contrasting with the madness that had just unfolded. Does anyone else have an objection to the policy? I asked, looking directly at Mama Joyce, who was shrinking into her seat, clutching her purse as if I might confiscate that too. Silence, absolute silence. Good, I said, handing the microphone back to the trembling pastor. I believe we are done here. Please clear the venue in 30 minutes. The sprinklers are scheduled to turn on at 7 o'clock, and I would hate for anyone designer outfits to get ruined. I turned on my heel and began to walk away, leaving Derek standing at the altar with a bride who was already taking off her ring and a mother who was pretending to be invisible. I walked back down the aisle the way I came, head held high, listening to the sound of my heels clicking against the stone, the sound of a woman walking out of a tragedy and into her triumph. Đây là phần kịch bản tiếp theo cho phần 11 cú quét thể định mệnh thế decline. Nội dung được viết liền mạch tập trung vào chi tiết tâm lý và hành động để tạo cảm xúc mạnh nhất cho giọng đọc AI. The air in the garden was so still you could hear the fountain sputtering in the distance, as if even the water was afraid to make a noise. Mr. Thompson did not look at me for permission. He knew his role perfectly. He signaled to one of the servers who walked onto the altar, carrying a portable credit card terminal on a silver platter as if it were a religious artifact. The juxtaposition was jarring, the symbol of commerce invading the space of vows. But this was no longer a wedding. It was a transaction, and the bill was overdue. Mr. Thompson picked up the machine, his movements precise and unhurried. He walked over to Derek, who was standing there with his chest heaved, trying to regain the composure he had lost when he screamed for security. Derek looked at the machine, and then he looked at the guests, trying to salvage his pride, trying to act as if this was just a minor administrative annoyance rather than a financial execution. The balance, sir, Mr. Thompson said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone, is exactly $350,000, covering the venue rental, the catering, the security detail, and the floral arrangements. We require immediate settlement to proceed. Derek let out a laugh, a sharp barking sound that was meant to sound dismissive, but sounded dangerously close to hysteria. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and arrogance. He truly believed I was bluffing. He truly believed that the plastic card in his pocket was a magic wand that could wave away reality. He did not understand that magic wands only work when the magician pays the subscription fee. You think you can scare me, Sophia? Derek sneered, addressing me directly, ignoring the manager standing in front of him. You think because you froze the joint checking account that I am helpless. You forgot who I am. I am Derek Brooks. I built my own company. I have resources you do not even know about. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket, his movements exaggerated for the audience. He pulled out a wallet made of ostrich leather, a gift I had bought him for his 30th birthday, and flipped it open. He extracted a single card, holding it up to the light, so that the sun caught the heavy black metal. It was the Obsidian Reserve card, the most exclusive credit card in our portfolio, heavy and cold to the touch, purely metallic. Do you see this? Derek shouted, holding the card up for the back row to see. This is a $1 million limit. This is power, Sophia. You might own the building, but I own the bank account. Run it. Thompson, run the whole thing. Add a 20% tip for the staff, just to show my ex-wife how little 300 grand means to me. The crowd murmured, impressed by the display. The obsidian card was legendary, a status symbol that few people actually saw in person. For a second I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of the guests. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe I was just a bitter ex-wife, trying to ruin his day. Jessica stood up from the grass where she had fallen, brushing off her dress, looking at her brother with renewed hope. Mr. Thompson took the card, his face impassive. He did not look impressed. He looked like a man who was about to euthanize a sick animal. He keyed in the amount, his fingers moving quickly over the rubber buttons. 350000, enter. He turned the machine toward Derek. Please insert the chip, sir. Derek snatched the machine from him, almost dropping it in his haste. He jammed the metal card into the slot with aggressive force, staring at me the entire time, a smirk playing on his lips. Watch and learn, Sophia, he muttered. Watch me buy you and sell you. The machine lit up, processing the transaction. The little digital dots on the screen spun in a circle. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The silence stretched so tight, I thought it might snap. Derek tapped his foot on the stone floor, impatient, confident. And then it happened. The sound was gun. Not loud, but in the quiet garden, it sounded like a gunshot. A flat, harsh electronic tone that signaled rejection. Beep! Derek frowned, looking down at the screen. He shook the machine slightly as if it were a broken toy. Chip error, he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. The chip is dirty. It happens with these metal cards. Your machine is cheap. Thompson. Mr. Thompson did not move. He simply waited. Try it again, Derek said, his voice rising in pitch. Run it again. He pulled the card out, wiped it vigorously on his tuxedo jacket, leaving a faint smudge on the expensive fabric, and jammed it back into the slot. This time he pressed the card down with his thumb, forcing the connection. Staring at the screen, willing the laws of mathematics to bend in his favor, processing. The guests leaned forward, holding their breath. Tiffany was chewing on her lips so hard, I thought it might bleed. She looked at the machine, then at Derek, then at the exit. She was doing the math in her head and the numbers were not adding up. Beep. The second rejection was louder, or maybe it just felt that way because the hope in the room had vanished. The screen flashed a message in bright red letters that Derek could not ignore. Declined code, do not honor. Derek stared at the words, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at the card in his hand, as if it had betrayed him personally, as if the inanimate object had suddenly grown a conscience. This is impossible, he whispered, but the microphone picked it up, broadcasting his despair to the entire estate. I have a limit. I have $1 million limit calling the bank right now. He pulled out his phone, fumbling with the screen, his fingers trembling so badly he dropped it once before picking it up. He dialed the VIP concierge line, the number that was supposed to connect him instantly to a personal banker. He put it on speakerphone, wanting everyone to hear the bank apologize for the error, wanting to vindicate himself. The line rang once. Then an automated voice filled the garden, cool and detached. We are sorry the account associated with this number has been closed due to a request from the primary account holder. If you believe this is an error, please contact the fraud department. Goodbye. The line went dead. The dial tone hummed for a second before Derek cut it off. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a balloon that had finally popped. It was the silence of 300 people realizing they were attending a fraud. Derek looked up, and for the first time, he did not look at me with anger. He looked at me with confusion, genuine, childlike confusion. He held up the black metal card, the symbol of his manhood, his success, his ego. "But it is my card," he stammered, looking at the guests, pleading for someone to believe him. "It has my name on it, Derek Brooks. It says it right here." Mr. Thompson gently took the machine back from Derek, loosening his grip, finger by finger. He looked at the screen one last time, then looked at Derek with a pity that was worse than scorn. "The card may have your name on it, Mr. Brooks," Mr. Thompson said, his voice quiet but amplified perfectly. "But the credit line does not. The machine is telling us that the authorized user privileges have been revoked." Authorized user. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and damning. It was the financial equivalent of calling him a child who had lost his allowance. The guests began to whisper furiously now, the shock turning into scandal. Everyone knew what authorized user meant. It meant he was not the owner. It meant he was just a guest on someone else's account. It meant that for 5 years, the cars, the suits, the dinners, and the lifestyle had all been sponsored by the woman standing in the red dress. Derek's face crumbled. The arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a hollow shell. He looked at the card one last time. Then he threw it on the ground. The metal clattered against the limestone, a pathetic sound that signaled the end of his "Rain, fix it!" He screamed at me, suddenly lunging forward, but stopping when Marcus took a step toward him. "You did this. You fixed it so I would look like a fool. Turn it back on, Sophia. Turn it back on right now, or I swear." "Or you swear what?" "Derek," I asked, stepping forward, my voice calm, answering his rage with ice. "You will sue me. With what money? You will hire a lawyer. With what retainer? You are standing at an altar. You cannot pay for wearing a suit. You have not bought about to marry a woman who looks like she is about to run, trying to spend money that was never yours." I pointed to the machine in Mr. Thompson's hand. The decline was not a mistake. Derek, it was a correction. The bank finally corrected the error of believing you were a solvent individual. And now everyone here knows the truth. The machine let out one final sound as it timed out a long, monotonous beep that echoed through the silent garden, sounding like a heart monitor flatlining, marking the exact moment Derek Brooks ceased to exist as a man of status. The sound of the machine flatlining was the only thing anyone could hear for a solid 10 seconds. It was a sound that stripped away the tuxedo, the imported flowers, and the arrogance, leaving Derek standing there naked in his own failure. He looked at the card in his hand, flipping it over as if the magnetic strip might have the answer written on the back. He rubbed the chip with his thumb again, harder this time, almost bending the metal, desperate to clean away the reality that was staring him in the face. "This is a mistake," he stammered, his voice rising an octave, losing the deep baritone facade he put on for business meetings. "This is a glitch in the system. The network is down." "That is it. The Rosewood network is down. Your Wi-Fi is cheap." Thompson. "I told you we should have brought in a satellite uplink." Mr. Thompson did not blink. "Sir, our network is fully operational. We just processed a transaction for a bottle of sparkling water at the bar 30 seconds ago. The system is working." The card is not Derek's face turned a shade of purple. I was not used to seeing. He looked like a cornered animal lashing out at the nearest threat. He pointed a shaking finger at Mr. Thompson, his other hand gripping the useless black card like a weapon. "Do not lie to me," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips, landing on the microphone. "You are trying to sabotage me. This is a conspiracy. You are working with her, are not you. You are working with Sophia to embarrass me. Well, it is not going to work. Call the bank. Get the regional manager on the phone right now. I want the president of Chase Bank on the line. Immediately tell them Derek Brooks is calling, and if they do not authorize this charge, I will pull every dime of my assets out of their institution and bankrupt them." He was unraveling completely. The guests were no longer whispering. They were staring in open-mouthed horror, watching a man have a complete psychotic break with reality. He was shouting demands to a bank that had already closed his file, threatening to withdraw assets he did not possess. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I decided it was time to put him out of his misery. Watching him flail was satisfying, but I had a schedule to keep, and the sprinklers were set for 7. "You do not need to call the bank." "Derek?" I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a scalpel through diseased tissue. I took a step closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at me, forcing him to see the architect of his demise. He froze the phone halfway to his ear, his chest heaving. Why he breathed out the word, sounding small and broken. "Why should not I call them? They need to fix this." "Because there is nothing to fix," I replied calmly, closing the distance until I was standing right next to him at the altar, occupying the space where a best man should have been. "I am the one who locked the card. Derek, I am the one who flagged the account, and I am the one who authorized the decline." Derek stared at me, his eyes darting back and forth, trying to process the information, trying to find a loophole. "You cannot do that," he hissed low enough so the guests would have to strain to hear, but the microphone caught every syllable. "That is illegal. That is financial abuse. You cannot lock me out of my own money. I am a joint owner on that account. My name is on the card, and that is where you are confused," I said, holding up a hand to stop him. My voice became professorial, the tone I used when explaining complex equity structures to junior analysts. "You see, Derek, you never actually read the fine print, did you? You never looked at the monthly statements. You never asked why your credit score jumped 200 points the month we got married. You just assumed that my success was your success by osmosis." I turned to the audience, addressing them as much as I was addressing him. "Derek is not a joint owner on the Obsidian Reserve account," I announced clearly, ensuring the back row could hear every word. "He never qualified for it. His debt-to-income ratio 5 years ago was abysmal, and his credit history was riddled with missed payments on student loans. The bank would not touch him." I turned back to Derek, who was looking at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. "So to help you rebuild your image, I added you to my account." I explained, my voice dripping with the patience one reserves for a slow child. "I made you an authorized user. Do you know what that means, Derek? It means you were given a plastic card with your name printed on it so you could feel important. It means you were allowed to spend my money, earn points for my portfolio, and build credit off my history. But you never owned the account. You were never the landlord. Derek, you were just a tenant." Derek shook his head slowly, the denial evident in his eyes. "No," he whispered. "That is not true. I paid the bills. I signed the checks. You signed checks from a joint checking account that I funded." I corrected him ruthlessly. "You were playing with an allowance, Derek, a very generous $1 million allowance. But an authorized user has no legal claim to the credit line. The contract states very clearly that the primary account holder retains the absolute right to revoke privileges at any time without notice, and for any reason." I paused, letting the legal reality sink in. I watched as he mentally replayed the last 5 years, realizing that every time he slapped that card down on a dinner table, every time he bought a suit, every time he booked a flight, he was asking for my permission. He thought he was a king, but he was just a prince playing with the queen treasury. And then I delivered the final blow, the sentence that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "And there is one more clause you missed," I said, leaning in closer, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. The user agreement has a specific stipulation regarding domestic changes. It states that authorized user privileges are contingent upon the continuation of the relationship that granted them, in our case marriage. The contract says rights terminate immediately upon the dissolution of the union. I gestured to Tiffany, who was standing frozen in her crystal-encrusted dress, and then to the lavish decorations around us. You wanted a divorce, Derek. You signed the papers days ago, but you just had to have this wedding. You just had to stand up here publicly and declare your union to another woman. You effectively announced to the world and to the banking algorithms that our marriage is dead. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. So when you said I do to her, you said, goodbye to the money. The system heard you, Derek. You canceled yourself. The moment you tried to pay for this wedding with my card. The fraud algorithm recognized that you were trying to use spousal privileges for a mistress. It triggered the kill switch. You did not just crash your wedding, you liquidated your life. Derek dropped the card. It fell onto the limestone with a quiet clatter, landing next to his shiny, rented shoes. He looked down at it, realizing it was just a piece of metal, now no more valuable than a scrap of tin. He looked up at me, and I saw the light go out behind his eyes. The bravado was gone, the arrogance was gone. All that was left was the terrifying realization that he was 35 years old, unemployed and completely broke, standing in front of 300 people he had lied to. The guests were silent, no longer finding entertainment in the spectacle. Now there was only shock. The brutality of the financial takedown was so precise, so complete that it was terrifying. They looked from me to Derek, realizing that while he had been playing checkers, I had been playing three-dimensional chess. They realized that the woman in the red dress was not just a scorned ex-wife. She was a financial force of nature. Tiffany let out a small whimper, the first sound she had made in minutes. She looked at Derek not with love, but with the calculating gaze of a woman who realizes her investment has just gone bankrupt. She looked at the ring on her finger, the ring that had been charged to a business account that was likely frozen by now, and she looked at the exit. Derek turned to her, desperate, reaching out a hand. "Babe," he pleaded, his voice shaking. "Please, you have to believe me. I can fix this. I have other accounts. I have crypto." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut him off. "You have nothing, Derek," I said, turning away from him. The crypto wallet was linked to the same recovery email as the bank account. I secured that too. "You are not just declined, you are deleted," I signaled to Mr. Thompson, who nodded grimly. The show was over. The lesson had been taught. And as the reality of his new life washed over Derek Brooks, I simply smoothed the skirt of my red dress and prepared to watch the final collapse, knowing that the check had finally cleared, and the balance was zero. The silence that stretched across the garden was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of the fountain, which seemed to be mocking Derek with its cheerful bubbling. Everyone was looking at Derek, but I was looking at Tiffany. I watched as the realization washed over her in slow motion. It started in her eyes, which widened as the mental calculator in her head finally tallied the numbers and realized the sum was zero. It traveled down to her hands, which began to tremble, not with nerves, but with rage. The blushing bride who had walked down the aisle 10 minutes ago, convinced she was marrying into a dynasty, was gone. In her place stood a woman who realized she had been conned. Tiffany took a step back, her expensive heels sinking slightly into the grass, creating physical distance between her and the man she had just promised to love for better or worse. She looked at Derek as if he were a stranger, as if he were a disease she was afraid of catching. Derek, sensing the shift, reached out for her, his hand grasping at the air where she had just been standing. "Babe," he pleaded, his voice seated, cracking with desperation. "Do not look at me like that. She is lying, Tiffany. She is just jealous. She is trying to manipulate you." Tiffany let out a laugh, a sharp, harsh sound that had no humor in it. She looked from me to Derek and back to me, connecting the dots that should have been obvious months ago. She looked at the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, the one Derek had given her for her birthday, and then she looked at the declined credit card machine still in Mr. Thompson's hand. The illusion was shattering piece by piece, and the shards were cutting her deep. "You are the liar," Tiffany spat out, her voice rising in pitch, becoming shrill and ugly. "You told me you were a self-made millionaire. You told me you built that consulting firm from the ground up. You said the penthouse was yours free and clear. You said Sophia was just the accountant, the boring wife who managed the books while you made the deals." Derek took a step toward her, his hands up in a placating gesture, sweating profusely. "Under the afternoon sun, I did build it." "Baby, I am the visionary," Derek stammered, trying to spin a narrative that had already collapsed. "Just because the accounts are in her name technically does not mean I did not earn it. We can fight this. We can get a lawyer and sue her for my share." Tiffany shook her head, her face twisting with disgust. "Technically," she screamed the word echoing off the stone walls of the estate. "Technically, you are broke, Derek. Technically, you are living on an allowance like a teenager. Technically, you have been spending her money to buy my affection." She pointed a manicured finger at his chest, poking him hard with every word. "I quit my job for you," she yelled. "I moved out of my apartment because you said we were moving into the penthouse. I leased a new car because you said you would handle the payments. You told me I would never have to worry about money again." "It is just a setback," Derek begged, reaching for her hand again, managing to grab her wrist this time. "We will figure it out. I have connections. I have ideas. We still have us, Tiffany. We still have our love. And is not that what this day is about? It is about us against the world." The crowd watched in rapt attention, witnessing the implosion of a relationship that was built entirely on a foundation of greed. Tiffany looked down at his hand on her wrist, and then she looked up at his face, seeing the panic and the weakness there. For a woman like Tiffany, weakness was the ultimate sin. She did not want a partner, she wanted a provider, and the man standing in front of her could not even provide a valid credit card. "Love," she repeated the word, dripping with venom. "You think I am standing here in a $20,000 dress for love? You think I tolerated your mother constant criticism for love? You think I let you drag me into this mess because I just loved your personality so much?" She yanked her wrist free from his grip, with a violent motion causing him to stumble back slightly. "Love does not pay the rent." "Derek!" she shouted, her voice breaking with the intensity of her anger. "Love does not pay for first-class flights or Michelin-star dinners or Cartier bracelets. You are a fraud. You are a con artist. You dragged me into your little fantasy world and made me look like a fool in front of hundreds of people." Derek looked around at the guests, seeing the judgment in their eyes. He looked at his mother, who was sitting in the front row looking pale and defeated. He looked at me standing there calmly in my red dress, the architect of his ruin. He had nowhere left to turn, so he tried one last desperate play, the emotional manipulation. "Think about the baby," Derek whispered loud enough for the microphone to catch it, dragging an innocent child into his mess. "Think about our family, Tiffany. Do not walk away from your family over money." That was the wrong thing to say. Tiffany's eyes blazed with a cold fire. She looked down at her stomach and then back at him with a look of pure calculation. "My baby is not going to have a father who cannot afford diapers," she hissed. "My baby deserves a legacy, not a mountain of debt, and a father who is technically an authorized user on his ex-wife credit card." She reached down to her left hand, grabbing the massive 3-carat diamond ring that sat on her finger, the ring that I had watched him buy on the security camera. The ring that was charged to a business account that was now flagged for embezzlement. She twisted it viciously, not caring if it hurt, scratching her skin in her haste to remove it. "You want to talk about family?" she screamed, pulling the ring free, holding it up so the sun caught the facets one last time. "Here is your family legacy." "Derek." She threw the ring. It was not a gentle toss, it was a fastball aimed directly at his face. The heavy platinum band with its massive stone struck him right on the cheekbone, cutting the skin instantly. A small trickle of blood began to run down his face, mingling with the sweat and the tears of frustration. The ring bounced off his face and clattered onto the stone floor, spinning noisily before coming to a rest at my feet. "I want nothing from you," Tiffany yelled, backing away, her chest heaving heavily. "You are a liar. You are a loser, and I am done being your prop." Derek stood there holding his cheek, looking at the woman who had promised to cherish him 5 minutes ago. "Tiffany." "Wait!" he cried out, taking a step toward her. "Please do not go. Do not come near me," she shrieked, gathering up the heavy layers of her tulle skirt, turning her back on him completely. "I am leaving. And if you try to follow me, I will call the police and tell them exactly how you scammed me too." She began to run back down the aisle the way she had come. Her exit was as dramatic as her entrance had been, but instead of walking toward a future, she was running away from a disaster. She pushed past the guests, not caring who she bumped into, ignoring the gasps and the whispers. She was running for her life, running back to whatever safety she could find now that her golden ticket had turned out to be counterfeit. Derek watched her go, his hand still clutching his bleeding cheek. He looked utterly abandoned. The guests parted to let Tiffany pass, watching her disappear through the garden gates, the sound of her sobbing fading into the distance. I looked down at the ring resting by my shoe. I bent down gracefully, picking it up between two fingers, examining it in the sunlight. It was a beautiful piece, flashy and expensive, completely hollow of meaning, just like the man who bought it. I walked over to Derek, who was staring at the empty aisle, staring at the ghost of his future. "I believe this belongs to the company," I said quietly, dropping the ring into his breast pocket, checking it against the debt you owe. Derek looked at me, his eyes empty. The fight had gone out of him. He was alone. The mistress had fled. The mother was humiliated and the ex-wife was holding the keys to the kingdom. The betrayal was complete, and it was sweeter than any wedding cake could have ever been. The departure of the bride was the signal that the dam had finally broken, and the floodwaters of reality were rushing in to drown what was left of the Brooks family dignity. Derek stood alone at the altar, a man who had lost his wife, his mistress, his money, and his reputation in the span of 20 minutes. But the toxicity of that family ran deep and like a cornered hydra. When one head is cut off, another snaps forward to bite. Mama Joyce rose from her seat in the front row, her face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation that she had perfected over decades of manipulating her children and her community. She did not look at her son who was bleeding and broken. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "You are a demon, Mama," Joyce screamed, her voice shaking with the force of her rage, pushing past the stunned guests to stand next to her son, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You came here to destroy us. You came here to humiliate a good man because you could not keep him. You are evil, Sophia. You are a bitter, barren woman who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. God will punish you for this desecration of a holy union." Jessica, who had been nursing her bruised ego and her ruined dress on the sidelines, saw her mother advance and decided to join the fray. She scrambled to her feet, her hair wild and her makeup running, looking less like a suburban mother and more like a banshee. She rushed to her mother's side, creating a united front of delusion. "You should be in jail," Jessica shrieked, her voice cracking. "You assaulted me. You ruined this wedding. You planned this whole thing. You probably paid Tiffany to leave. You are sick. Sophia, you are a psychopath who uses money to control everyone. Well, you cannot control us. We are a family and we are stronger than your bank account." The guests watched in horrified fascination as the two women screamed insults at the person who held the deed to the property they were standing on. It was a masterclass in deflection. They could not attack the facts, so they attacked my character. They tried to paint me as the villain to distract from the reality of their own failures. I stood perfectly still, letting them scream, letting them exhaust their supply of venom. I waited until Mama Joyce had stopped to take a breath, until Jessica had run out of names to call me. Then I raised the microphone one last time. "Are you quite finished?" I asked, my voice cool and detached, contrasting sharply with their hysteria. "You have no right to speak to us," Mama Joyce spat, clutching her chest, acting as if she were having a heart attack. "Actually, Joyce, I have every right," I said, stepping down from the altar to stand on the same level as them. Looking them in the eye, I have the right of a victim who has finally decided to press charges. I turned my gaze to Jessica, who was standing with her hands on her hips, trying to look intimidating despite the grass stains on her gold dress. "You called me a psychopath, Jessica," I said calmly. "But a psychopath is someone who lacks a conscience, someone who, say, steals from sick children to fund their own lifestyle." Jessica's face went pale. The color drained out of her cheeks so fast it looked like she was about to faint. She took a half step back, her bravado evaporating instantly. "I do not know what you are talking about," she stammered, her eyes darting to the side, looking for an escape route. "I think you do." I continued walking slowly toward her, forcing her to retreat. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. You are the treasurer for the Brooks Family Foundation, the small charity your father started to help underprivileged youth in the neighborhood. It is a noble cause, or at least it was until you took over the books." Derek looked up from his misery, confusion clouding his eyes. "What are you talking about, Sophia?" "Jessica handles the charity. She is an accountant. She is a thief." "Derek," I said brutally, turning to address the crowd again, ensuring the board members of that very charity who were sitting in the third row heard me clearly. "Last week, when I was auditing my own finances preparing for the divorce, I noticed some irregularities in the donations I made to the foundation. I have donated $50,000 a year for 5 years, thinking it was going to scholarship funds. But when I looked closer, I found that the money never made it to the students." I pulled a folded document from the small clutch I was carrying and held it up. It was a forensic accounting report. "I hired a forensic accountant 3 days ago." I explained, tapping the paper. His findings were fascinating. It seems that every time the foundation received a large donation, a corresponding withdrawal was made to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. And do you know who owns that shell company? I looked at Jessica, who was now shaking her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "No," Jessica whispered. "Please, Sophia, do not. It is owned by JMB Consulting." I said, reading from the paper, "Jessica Marie Brooks, you have siphoned over $200,000 from the charity in the last 2 years. You used that money to pay for your BMW, your vacations to Tulum, and that gold dress you are wearing right now. You are not just a bad sister-in-law, Jessica, you are a felon." The gasp from the crowd this time was not one of shock, but of outrage. The board members stood up, their faces red with anger. People who had donated money to that fund began to shout, demanding answers. Jessica looked around like a trapped rat, realizing that her suburban camouflage had been stripped away. It was alone. She screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. "I was going to pay it back. We had expenses. Derek needed help. Mom needed the house fixed. I did it for the family. You did it for yourself," I corrected her. "And unfortunately for you, embezzlement is a federal crime." I nodded to Marcus, who was standing by the garden gate. He spoke into his radio, and seconds later, 2 uniformed police officers walked into the garden. They did not look like they were there to secure a wedding. They looked like they were there to make an arrest. Jessica saw the uniforms and broke down completely. She fell to her knees, grasping at her mother, Skirt sobbing uncontrollably. "Mama, do not let them take me. I cannot go to jail. I have kids." "Mama." Joyce stood frozen, her world collapsing around her. She looked at her daughter, the thief, and her son, the fraud. and realized that the legacy she was so proud of was nothing but a criminal record. She tried to push Jessica away, distancing herself from the crime. "I did not know," she stammered, looking at the police, then at me. "I had nothing to do with this." "Sophia, tell them I did not know." I looked at Mama Joyce, with zero sympathy. "You raised them, Joyce. You taught them that appearance matters more than character. You taught them that they were entitled to things they did not earn. You may not have signed the checks, but you definitely drove the getaway car." The officers reached Jessica, pulling her up from the ground violently. She screamed, kicking and fighting, her mascara running down her face in black streaks, making her look like a horror movie villain. "Mrs. Jessica Brooks, you are under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As they dragged her away past the rows of stunned guests, past the white roses and the champagne tower, her screams echoed off the estate walls, a haunting soundtrack to the family destruction. Derek watched his sister being handcuffed and shoved into a squad car visible through the garden gates. He did not move to help her. He could not. He was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the disaster. Mama Joyce finally slumped into her chair, putting her face in her hands, weeping not for her children, but for the shame of it all, knowing that come Sunday morning she would be the pariah of her church. I looked around the garden at the guests who were now standing up, grabbing their purses and their coats, eager to escape the blast radius of the Brooks family implosion. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. They knew the wedding was over. They knew the reception was canceled, and they knew exactly who had won the war. I turned to Derek one last time. He was sitting on the steps of the altar, his head in his hands, the picture of utter defeat. "You wanted a memorable wedding, Derek," I said softly, looking down at him. "I think we accomplished that." I signaled to Mr. Thompson, who began to direct the staff to clear the tables. "The bill for the cleanup will be sent to your mother's address," I added, turning to walk away. "And Derek, you have 30 minutes before the gates close. I suggest you start walking now. It is a long way back to the city without a car." I walked back down the aisle, the sea of guests parting for me, like the Red Sea. I did not look back. I did not need to. I could feel the heat of the burning bridges behind me, and it felt like sunshine on my back. The collapse was total. The toxicity had been excised. And as I walked out of the Rosewood estate and toward my waiting car, I checked my phone. One notification from the bank. Transfer complete. My assets were safe. My future was secure, and I was finally completely and utterly free. The smell of stale fryer grease is something that you never quite get out of your pores. No matter how many times you shower, for Derek Brooks that smell had become his new cologne, replacing the imported sandalwood scents he used to wear when he was spending my money. 6 months had passed since the disaster at the Rosewood estate, and the world had continued to spin. But for Derek, it had stopped, and then started spinning in the opposite direction entirely. He was currently standing behind the counter of a fast food franchise on the south side of the city, wearing a polyester uniform that was 2 sizes too small. The name tag pinned crookedly to his chest, reading trainee. I know this not because I visit him, but because, in the age of social media, nothing stays hidden. A video had circulated a few weeks ago of a customer throwing a milkshake at him because the machine was broken, and Derek, the man who once demanded VIP table service, had to stand there and take it, wiping whipped cream off his face, while his teenage manager screamed at him to clean it up faster. It was a brutal fall from grace, but gravity is unforgiving when you build your penthouse on thin air. His life outside of work was equally grim. He was living in a basement apartment in a neighborhood that he used to make fun of, sharing the cramped space with the only person who still tolerated him. Mama Joyce. But tolerance is a generous word for what they had. Mama Joyce had not humbled herself. Instead, she had turned her bitterness inward, focusing it entirely on her son. I can imagine the scene perfectly, because I know the players so well. Derek sitting on a sagging mattress counting his tip money, trying to scrape together enough for rent while Mama Joyce sits in the corner complaining that the heater makes too much noise, blaming him for the fact that she has to take the bus to church now. "You let her trick you," she would say, her voice rasping with resentment. "You had it all, Derek, and you let that woman outsmart you. I told you to get her to sign the papers after the wedding, but you were too arrogant. You ruined us." And Derek would say nothing. He would just stare at the peeling paint on the wall, realizing that the mother who once treated him like a prince now looked at him like a pauper. Realized that her love was just as conditional as his credit limit. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away, the only salt in the air came from the Mediterranean Sea. I was sitting on the aft deck of a private yacht anchored off the coast of Positano, watching the sun dip below the horizon, turning the sky into a canvas of violet and gold. The silence here was heavy, but it was a good silence. It was the silence of peace, of security, of knowing. Everything around me was paid for, earned and owned. I was not alone. Sitting across from me was Julian. He was not a project I needed to fix. He was not a dependent I needed to claim on my taxes. He was a partner in every sense of the word. A successful architect who ran his own firm. Julian had his own money, his own legacy, and most importantly, his own self-respect. He did not need my light to shine. He had his own. Julian looked up from the book he was reading, smiling at me with a warmth that reached his eyes entirely devoid of calculation. "You are quiet this evening, Sophia," he said, his voice deep and calming. "Is everything all right?" I smiled back, stretching my legs out on the lounge chair, adjusting the silk robe I was wearing. "Everything is perfect, Julian. I was just thinking about how different the view is when you are not looking at it through a lens of stress." He reached over and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve the view, Sophia. You fought hard for it." My phone buzzed on the small, teak table beside me, disturbing the moment. Briefly, I picked it up, intending to turn it off completely, but the notification on the screen caught my eye. It was an automated email from the bank regarding the final closure of the old joint accounts, specifically the debt recovery status. I opened the email, curious to see the final tally. The message was brief and clinical, explicitly stating that the outstanding balance of $350,000 attributed to Mr. Derek Brooks had been deemed uncollectible by the primary financial institution. The debt had been sold to a third-party collection agency for pennies on the dollar. The email also noted that due to the terms of the authorized user agreement and the fraud investigation I had initiated, my credit score remained a pristine 820, while Derek Brooks had been flagged with a charge off that would haunt his financial profile for the next 7 years. I read the words and waited for a pang of guilt, waiting to feel sorry for the man I had once vowed to spend my life with. I waited to feel sad that he was likely dodging phone calls from debt collectors right now while I was sipping vintage champagne. But the guilt never came. All I felt was a profound sense of lightness. The weight of his ego, the weight of his family demands, the weight of his incompetence, was finally and legally gone. I looked at the delete button on the screen. It was a small red icon, but it held so much power I pressed it, watching the email vanish into the digital trash bin, taking the last remnant of Derek Brooks with it. "Is it important?" Julian asked, noticing the small smile playing on my lips. I put the phone down, face down on the table. I picked up my glass of champagne, the bubbles dancing in the golden light. "No," I said, looking at him, looking at the horizon, looking at my future. "It was just spam. Nothing to worry about." Julian smiled, raising his glass to clink against mine. "To freedom," then he said. I took a sip, took a cold, crisp liquid tasting like victory. "To freedom," I repeated. I looked out at the ocean, vast and open and endless. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who tried to buy love, the one who thought she had to shrink herself to make a man feel big. And then I looked at the woman I was now, the woman who canceled the cards, the woman who crashed the wedding, The woman who walked away with her head high and her bank account full. The best revenge wasn't leaving him destitute. The best revenge wasn't the public humiliation or the arrest of his sister. The best revenge was this. It was the quiet joy of a life that was finally fully mine. It was the realization that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had balanced the books, I had closed the account, and for the first time in my life, I was truly in the black. This story serves as a powerful reminder that financial independence is the ultimate form of self-defense. Sophia taught us that we should never shrink ourselves to accommodate someone else's ego, nor should we ever finance our own disrespect. The most powerful move isn't screaming or fighting. It is quietly removing your access and letting people sit with the consequences of their actions. True wealth isn't just about the numbers in a bank account. It is the peace that comes from knowing you can stand entirely on your own 2 feet, unshakable and free. If you believe that your peace is non-negotiable, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they hold the keys to their own kingdom. Don't let anyone be an authorized user of your life without your permission,